Welcome to another segment of Provocative Conversations, destined to provoke further thought and spark greater questions regarding God, church, and the religious establishments of both the past and the present. I am the proud heretic, Mr. Provocateur himself. Today I want to begin a very interesting topic to me. It was interesting to me from the time that God began to show me some things in regards to himself, in regard to his unlimitedness versus our limitedness, in regards to his will versus our will. And I think it will be very interesting to you, whoever hears this message. It will perhaps answer some questions that reside down within you or up within the confines or the realm of your cranial, your psyche, some things that you don't quite understand or don't quite meet up or coincide, match up with what you hear from the Bible and what you hear from, oh my goodness, I would dare say somewhere, and this is in my ignorance, I would dare say my current ignorance to the whole matter. I would dare to say that over 90% of people, especially those within the religious realm of at least Christianity, Judaism, the modern movements, and definitely people outside of the church, and perhaps due to the influence by the church, by the Bible, of the Bible, and just the way that society is built upon laws and regulations that tend to hold only certain people. It's not everybody. They say no one is above the law, but that's not true. We see that in our current White House administration right now, that can't be the whole truth. But this topic is so controversial. I don't even know if controversial is putting it right, because it's not so much a controversy. People just tend to preach it, teach it, speak about it on a daily basis as though it's fact, as though it's truth. Now, when I say as though it's truth, I'm saying as though the opposite of what I'm getting ready to speak in regards to when it comes to God and his will, man and his will. They speak the opposite of what I speak. This right here would definitely put me over into the realm of what would be defined as a heretic, a traitor of the faith. Call it whatever you want to call it. This is something that needs to get out to people. People need to realize this, and they need to begin to function in the reality of it. So people's ideas, people's experiences aren't matching up with what's being said in regards to this particular topic, this particular area of God. It's a big area. I'm going to split it up in sections, different teachings. I'm sure the teachings will have their progressive stages. They will build upon one another. I'll do my best to do that. And they will convey the message. I will do my best at where I am right now. And maybe don't measure where I am right now wholly by what I say, because oftentimes I'm further along than what I may be able to say, what I may be able to intellectually pass on to you in the form of words, in the form of conversation. However, I will do my utmost. This is a message I really, really, really want to convey and put out as clearly as possible. There are some gray areas here that I have not fully come into, but I know that I'm on the right track because I know what my God of God says to me. You have to know what your God of God says to you. Most of all, you have to know that it is from your God source and that it's not from your psyche. It's not from something you conjured up. This is a topic, this is an area that I've been worked on by God for years. So I'm not like a rookie to this conversation, to this particular topic. This is something God has been grooming me and building me for or in regards to, in accordance with what I'm getting ready to begin to expound upon. The topic of this particular area that I'll be speaking on is God's will must prevail. God's will must prevail. God's will must prevail, part 1. What I mean by that is that his plan and his purpose must become your reality. Whatever the will of God is, whatever that will is, whatever his plan and his purpose is, it must prevail. It will prevail. Whatever God's will and plan was for Adam, for mankind, for each of us individually, for you specifically, his plan and his purpose are found within his will. His will never be against his plan and his purpose. His will always be in conjunction with his plan and his purpose. His plan and his purpose will only echo and coincide with his will. Not your will, not my will, not their will, but God's will. Somehow we spookified and hellified, terrified people, magnified the so-called will of mankind, mankind's will, to such a degree that now it is just automatically assumed. Well, everyone has a will. They call it free will. They call it your ability to choose, the power to choose. They say stuff like, God will never step across your will. God will never violate your will. There's one thing God can't do. He can't violate your will. He can't go against your will. Can I help you here and help you peek into a matter of truth? There ain't no way that man has a so-called will or an ability to choose to do what he wants to do as a whole, and in regard especially to his so-called salvation or to the so-called accepting or the receiving of God in his life or whatever else in conjunction with that line of thought, that chain of thought, that spectrum of thought. Now, there are some people that I like who I think are putting out truth, who are not necessarily, I don't think, at least some of the stuff that I've heard them say or not say. it's obvious that they are not in agreement with this chain of thought to the degree that I am. But I believe that it is purpose for me to record this. I don't know who will hear this. All I know is it's necessary to put this out and bring forth another chain of freedom of thought, freedom of the preponderance of evidence. It is evident that God reserves his sovereignty right, his sovereign right when it comes to Adam, when it comes to humanity, mankind, you and me. God has not relinquished himself to mere mortal or relinquished himself above humanity. You and I are still governed by the purposes, the plans of God as it pertains to your life and my life and his life and her life and their life. His plan and his purpose must become your reality. In other words, God's will must prevail over yours. God's will must remain above yours. It must overcome yours if you have a so-called will. These things here, we look at the English terminology of the Bible and we just say, see the Bible there say will and all of these things and choose. And you have to remember, in the original text, you honestly don't know what it said. Is God telling you that today, that you controlling everything, that you do what you want? You are a free being. I don't think he's telling anyone that, unless how the Bible says God sent a lion spirit. The Bible says, if possible, even the very elect would be duped. And I think that's what has happened. Those who consider themselves the elect, the ecclesia, the called out ones, those who are the holy ones, the righteousness of God, those who are the new creations, the born again believers, they feel, and other religions and other groups of people feel that man has this power over God. And I'm going to do something on that. This is not necessarily on that, but it hinges upon it, or it's connected with it. It's in line with it. It's a part of that particular tree, that particular branch of thought. But this teaching here, this message here, this conversation here is about God's purpose and plan in regards to you. It has to, it shall, it will prevail over you and over your so-called will. And his purpose and plan must become your reality. In other words, not only does his plan and purpose for your life have to become what it is, whatever his will is, it has to become that. But it not only has to become that because he's already decided upon that, but it must become that to you. It must become your reality. It must become real to you. It must become an active revelation within you. It must expand and be expounded upon within you, within your psyche, in order for you to operate in a prevailed or prevailing state. What God is willing to do and has willed himself to do for you is going to prevail. It's going to happen. His purpose, his plan for you is going to happen, period. But whether or not you believe that and you receive that, which only affects you in the realm of your psyche, it doesn't affect whether you accept it or not, doesn't affect the reality of the matter. It's already reality. It's already what it is. It already exists. But whether or not you live within the existence of that truth, whether or not you begin to reflect, your life begins to reflect, your thinking, your attitude, your behavior begins to reflect upon that right nowness of the reality of the prevailing will of God in your life. Even if that thing is not reality within you, it's still reality. But if you don't get that thing down in you and begin to ponder it and let it wallow over and turn over inside of you, and if you don't allow it to begin to purge all of the impure teachings, all of the garbage of tradition and religion and what society, society always has to, I don't know if I ever finished that statement that I was going to make. Society always holds humanity responsible. People in society are so messed up now until they are so conscious of this so-called will and ability to choose and conscious state of knowing a thing or whatever, that it pees them off when they see someone commit a heinous crime, such as going into, say, a school or something, and then shooting a bunch of people up and killing people. And then the shooter has the audacity to commit suicide.
That just makes me mad.
They get really peed off at that. Why? Because they can't hold somebody responsible. You had the nerves to pull this off and then get from out of the realm of responsibility as far as man is concerned. And we're mad. So now you go after the man's wife like they did in the shooting that occurred at the gay nightclub in Orlando, Florida. They went after his wife. Then you go after the parents. You go for the parents. So now you hold the parents responsible for the gun that they purchased 10 years ago that they left in the house in the same spot that it's always been or whatever else. So now the parent is... We always want to hold someone responsible. But in order for us to be able to hold them responsible, we have to conclude that they first have a will and they have an ability, how the legal system calls it, the ability to not only form the intent, but to actually enjoy the intent. So you have to show that a person is actively sane at some point in the planning process or during the shooting time period or whatever, in order to hold them more responsible or even accountable at all. Or I guess they hold them accountable, but will they be able to legally prosecute them? So we're so wanting to put people in jail or hold people in prison or put people on death row, cause them to be murdered by a system, and then that makes it all good, all because we believe that man operates on this free will concept. this concept of free will, the ability to choose and make decisions. Now, I'm really going all around with what I'm saying, but what I'm basically saying is you must know that whatever God's will is, again, as it relates to salvation, a person being so-called saved, as it relates to them spending eternity with God versus spending eternity in hell, all of this is based upon God's will. And whatever God's will is, it must prevail. His will must prevail. And remember, his will holds his purposes and plans. That's what God's will curtails. His purpose and his plan for you, for me, for each of us. So when you say, or when I say that God's will must prevail, his will must win out over yours. There is no way that Adam can go to hell because of something that Adam did or something that Adam came short on doing. There's no way that Adam can go to hell if God hadn't already willed for Adam to go to hell. It doesn't matter what Adam does. If God has already planned and purposed a thing, and neither you nor anyone else can prove that God has purposed or planned for any of his, and we're all his, every one of us. You cannot prove that God planned and purposed for any of us, anyone, to go to hell. Which means that it's all good. It's all good. Why? Because his will must prevail and his purpose and plan will do what it's supposed to do. It will accomplish that which it was sent out to accomplish. But it must become your reality. No matter how much you don't believe this, it will become your reality. It must. It has to. It will become your reality. It has to. Whether it becomes your reality on this side of life or on the other side of life, or however it happens, it will become your reality. Why? Because it is the reality, and all of us one day will have to live in reality. Not in the reality of our psyche, not in the reality that we in our human emotional state and through the information of our five senses, how we're able to conjure up a thing or receive information in regards to a thing, and then we begin to form and shape our thinking and our behavior, our attitude in conjunction with what has come through our senses. And in turn, it ends up forming a false reality that is nonetheless reality, but only reality within you. It's not the truth. It's not the reality of the truth, but it's a real state for you in your psyche because you're believing it. You're embracing it. You're feeding your emotions into it, or feeding it into your emotions. When you do that, it doesn't change what really is in relation to what God has done, but it does challenge you here on earth, and it's going to keep challenging you. But it don't change anything as it relates to God, because his will is going to prevail. It must prevail regardless of where you struggle. Now, the word will, when I say will, I'm not just saying God's will prevail. Though I am saying that too. But the way that I'm using will is I'm talking about that part of you that this is where people come up with the notion that, see, man does have a free will. See, man does have something, this ability to choose and to do as he pleases. And man was made in the likeness of God, and God is able to choose freely and all of this here stuff and decide and make decisions. But we'll find out how true all of this is as we begin to read. But right now, I want to go over just the basic definitions, and it's going to take a little bit, but get these definitions within you. Remember some of them by heart within you, so that you can refer to them when you hear people talking about the human will and man's ability to choose and man's power to choose. It says the human will, that's that conscious, deliberate part of you that you give birth to conscious, deliberate action. You consciously think about it. You deliberate what you're going to do, and then you do it. That's the will, the ability to pull it off. It's the power of control the mind has over its own actions. The power of control that the mind has over its own actions. It's like the freedom of the will. You have this freedom. Okay. Man has this so-called freedom of his will. Now, because we're talking about God, I'll refer more to God. I'll try, but I'll keep going over to man's will. God has made a conscious, deliberated act towards your life within his plan and his purpose. God meant what he did. He was consciously aware of what he did. He thought it out, and he said, this is what's going to be. So the power to control the mind, the power of control the mind has over its own actions. Do you think God relinquishes his power, the power of his will, the power of his purpose and plan, that he somehow relinquishes that control over to your humanity or over to human beings, over to Adam, and says, Adam, just do as you please. Do whatever the hell you want. It don't matter. Hell, you like me anyway. Just do what you want. The power of control the mind has over its own actions. It's the power to make decisions. And that's what they say. You know, man has the power to make his own decisions. You do, huh? We'll see about that. I do believe that there are some inner mental decisions that we have to make within ourselves, but even God ingratiates or graces us to be able to make those proper decisions once we're brought to a certain level in him. But neither you nor I have the power to make our own decisions. But anyway, we'll get on that as we continue on along this line of thought, this line of one-sided conversations right now. The power to make decisions. Do you not understand that God has the power and he reserves the power for himself to make decisions? So whatever God has decided upon has to be. It's the power of choosing one's own actions. The power of choosing one's own actions. It's the act or the process of using or assessing one's choice. Volition. Something that you do with the word volition, it means of your own will or of your own power, of your own ability. But God reserves the ability to assert his will over all of us. And he continues to hold that, and he continues to use that ability that only he possesses. You don't assert, human beings don't assert their choice over God's will. The will means, and I don't really agree with wishing, and the will deals with wishing. I don't believe in that sense. But anyway, the will, is purpose or determination. And it also says stubborn determination. Whatever God has purposed, whatever God has determined, that is within his will. A good definition for will as it relates to God, it means that which God has purposed or determined to be or to not be. If God has already, or what God has already purposed for Adam, remember Adam is in reference to mankind. What God has already purposed and determined for Adam is a done deal. It happens whether you like it, I like it, or whether no one likes it. Because God has already purposed it and determined it. That's what it means when it talks about his will. It also says that the will is the purpose as carried out, or as to be carried out. God has a plan and a purpose, and his plan and his purposes must become your reality. It must become exactly as he spoke it in your life. It must become your reality within you, but most of all, it must take place, because in actuality, it has already taken place. Because that which is has already been. Calling those things that be not as though they were. Lamb slain before the foundations of the world. It's to decide or to bring about or attempt to effect or bring about by an act of the will. But we already know that that's what the will is, but the ability to decide and then bring about that thing. Whatever God has decided upon, God shall bring it about. How would I say? The will, as it relates to God, it's his influence, his ability to exert control over you, your impulses, and your actions. People say that we have the ability to influence and exert control over our impulses and actions. To a certain degree, we do. But to whatever degree we do is only because of what God has done as far as empowering us. Remember, the Bible says, for it is God who works in you to will and to do of his good pleasure. It is God who works in you to will and to do. It's the faculty of conscious and deliberate choice of action. It's something that you do in your own volition or in your own abilities. I like the fact that it says that it has to do with, the will has to do with anything that's decided upon or chosen by a person in authority. Well, we all know who's actually in authority. Not humanity, not Adam, but God is. And God is the only one who can actually do what it is needs to be done as it relates to your life, his plan, and his purpose for you in your life, for Adam as a whole, for mankind as a whole. God did not leave that in our hands to do what we want to do. Whatever his will is, Just know that it will happen. It is inevitable that it's going to happen. It is becoming reality because it is the reality. It is becoming that reality within you because it is the reality. It is becoming true to you because it is true. Whatever his plan, whatever his purpose is, it's becoming true to you. God's will, or to say that something will happen, I'm really saying that word will, not like God's will, but God's will happen. That second will, it indicates the way that something happens or the way that something is done. It's going to happen. How it's going to happen, I don't know. How it's going to be done, I don't know. Anybody try to tell you they do know, they just talking noise. They don't know. I know how you get saved. No, you don't. No, you don't. We don't know how a man is born again, so-called born again. Your Bible talks about that too. Will, the word will, is used to indicate one's ability or capacity to do a thing. It's the part of the mind with which somebody consciously decides things. God has already decided upon his will, and it will happen. That's why I say the will of God must prevail. Whatever his will is, God has determined to do it, and he's determined what's necessary in order to achieve what he wants to be done, and it will be done. Period. Whatever he planned, whatever he arranged in the past, in regards to your future, which is now your present, and anything beyond right now, has already been willed, which is why it will happen. It must happen. It must become the reality. It must become your reality if you're going to function properly here on earth. It has to. I know this is a slow start, and trust me, I can run faster with this, but if I run faster, you won't get it fully as I go down the road. I already know what's up the road because I know what's coming, because I have in front of me that which God has gifted me, enabled me to put down on paper and then also put in a recording. None of this is coming from somebody else. I've not heard anybody talk on this here. And you probably won't hear anybody talk on it, at least not from the angle that I'm talking on it. This would be labeled some type of heresy, some type of false doctrine. Let it be what it is. That means I'm in good company, because they thought Jesus was speaking heresy. They thought Paul was speaking heresy. They thought the disciples were. The Pharisees and the Sadducees just thought God could not be behind Jesus in what Jesus was saying and doing. So I'm in good company. So if you just give me a moment to establish a thing, to help you to go with this thing. Remember, these are truths that are not easily grasped. And not only are they not easily grasped, but it's even more difficult to try to explain it and to try to get it out of your own internals, what you know God has said and shown to you, and try to break it down in such a way that the hearers will be able to not just hear it, but to understand it enough to be able to apply it. But first, to be convicted or convinced in regards to the validity of it. Now, I know that one man watereth and one plants and one waters, but it's God who gives the increase. And I don't know if I'm the one bringing forth the increase, or I'm the one who's watering it, or I'm the one who's planting it. I don't know what it is. I don't know what stage your life is in as you hear this. But what I do know is that I have to pace myself to do this here. This was a hard topic for me to begin with. First of all, to learn. Goodness, to learn. But I'm talking to begin to record this here because it's so in depth, it's so deep, it takes all of your concentration. Trust me, you're not going to get this on the first go round. This has taken me multiple years to come to an understanding to embrace this to the degree that I embrace it now. So let's just develop some things as we go along, and we'll see how far we get in it. But we'll get it all done. Trust you me, we'll get it all done. Let's go to the second part.